Hi everyone, Quiveen here from the comfort of my kitchen. In today's video, we're going to take a deeper look into the month of January, the coming month. So we're going to be looking at a few things that will change and mostly things that will stay the same as we go through the month of January. For a start, taking a look in the evening sky here, of course it hasn't changed too much since December, but there will be a meteor shower coming up, the quadrantids. So the quadrantids have their radiant in Bootes. There we go. So they're the quadrantids. They're a reasonably good meteor shower. We can see their zenith hourly rate max is 80. According to some sources that I've seen, on particularly dark nights, you can get as high as 100 in particularly clear skies and clear conditions. So it looks like they're peaking there on the night of the 4th. But with meteor showers, they do vary a little bit from year to year. So the quadrantids will be running in early January for you to see. It'll add a few extra meteors to the sky. The main thing that I want to bring up is Mercury. I mentioned that Mercury will be coming into the sky and reaching its greatest elongation. This is its greatest western elongation, so it's the highest in the sky that we see Mercury in the morning, which means we see it in the east. It is a little counterintuitive, but that's the way we name these things. It's very similar to the prevailing wind. The westerlies come from the west and blow into the east. So this is Mercury. It's, as we can see there, almost exactly a half Mercury, which is a sign that it's at its greatest elongation. That looks a little bit more like a half, but the dates that I'm seeing for the greatest elongation are a little bit later than the actual half. I guess I'll have to figure out exactly why that is before I make a video dedicated exclusively to Mercury. It's going to be visible. It's harder to see Mercury when we're this close to wintertime, when the sun is low in the sky and the arc of the ecliptic across the sky is quite low. So we can see that the angle between Mercury and Venus and the ground here, it's a pretty narrow angle. If you're close to the equator, it'll be practically 90 degrees, which means we're standing high up over the horizon instead of lying low like this. So in other parts of the world, you can get a better view of Mercury. For us here in the Northern Hemisphere, it will vary with the time of year. So when Mercury is at its greatest elongation later in the year, it will look a little bit better. Here's Venus, past its halfway point there as we're coming into January. We're still going to have Venus for quite another while. It orbits the sun much more slowly than Mercury, so we have more time to observe Venus. So Venus is going to be there, and we are going to have the new moon and different planets coming into opposition, but we're not going to have any crazy major events. What we will have is the moon passing close to the planets as it gets around the sun as we go through its new point. So there we go. We can see that the moon is passing through Scorpius. The constellation Scorpius is coming back into view. We can see the red star there, Antares, very close to that narrow crescent moon in the sky. I'm going to move us forward a little bit further, possibly through to the end of January. I do want to check. When Mars is coming back into the sky, Mars should be returning to the sky reasonably soon. There it is. So there's Mars. It's above the horizon while the sun is under the horizon there, but it's still not quite visible to the naked eye. So in between the sunrise and Venus, Mars is in there. It's just starting to come back. It'll get more and more visible as we push later into the year. We'll move ourselves back towards the beginning of the night, and we'll move ourselves back a little bit closer to the beginning of January as well. We can see the moon here from about mid to late January, starting with the 19th there by Jupiter. The moon arcs through a very interesting part of the sky, this part of the sky that I'm sure we're all familiar with now if you watch my channel regularly. Let's get ourselves back to the right date there. So this part of the sky, the ecliptic, where we see the planets, where we see the moon, it is also an interesting part of the sky in terms of the stars and deep sky objects that lie out in that direction outside of our solar system. Them being on the ecliptic is essentially a coincidence. They're not affected by our sun's gravity. But the fact that the Pleiades are there means that we get these wonderful close conjunctions. So we can see this little difficult, as I'm sure you can tell, because these objects are, there we go, quite faint, and the moon is so bright and the Pleiades are quite faint, but there they are, right next to each other in the sky. If you do give yourself a long enough exposure image, the moon will practically turn into a white featureless shape, while the Pleiades will stand out a little bit more clearly. If we get the light of the moon out of our view, you know, there's the Pleiades as you would see them in the dark. So the moon makes these interesting close passes or conjunctions with these objects as it moves around the sky. So we can see a wonderful one here between the pretty much the half moon and Jupiter. So there we go. That's on the 18th. So that's a fantastic image to catch. Even if you only see it with your eyes, you will see that incredibly bright dot of Jupiter just hanging out there underneath the half moon. And this is something that we see regularly. You know, every month the moon is going to pass through these parts of the sky. But whether or not you get to see the moon directly over Jupiter or right next to the Pleiades, it does depend what part of the Earth you're on. The moon is always moving through the sky. So if you're in a different part of the world to Ireland, if you're in, you know, for example, Vancouver or still somewhere that's a bit far away from Ireland, practically on the other part of the hemisphere, same northern hemisphere, you know, west versus east, or how far around the planet you are. If you're bordering the Pacific Ocean, the moon will be further ahead or further behind from the Pleiades, depending on what night you go out, compared to what you're seeing here. And the same is true for Jupiter. So in these instances where the moon is going to move noticeably in the space of 24 hours, as it does matter where on Earth you're located. In terms of latitude and longitude, I know it really, really matters where you are. For a lot of the things that we see in the sky, you know, if we can see it here in Ireland, you'll see it in Canada or you'll see it in Korea as well. It doesn't really matter. But for some of these things, you can see even as we push later into the night, the moon and Jupiter don't look like they're lining up so perfectly as they did earlier in the evening. So by the time, you know, Jupiter sets for us and the moon and Jupiter rise for the next part of the planet, they're going to be significantly further apart. So for conjunctions, that can really, really matter. I'll move us up a little bit closer to the end of the month because I know the moon is going to be past full as we come up to the end of the month there. So here we are on the 31st of January all the way through to the end. And the moon is pretty much back to the way it was when we started the year on New Year's Eve. So this is very similar to how the moon will look on New Year's Eve. The moon cycle is 29.5 days. So a month apart, the moon will be slightly further along slightly further along in its phases after 30 or 31 days because the moon cycle is really 29.5 days. So it will look a little bit different at the end of the month come to the beginning of the month, but it will be practically back to the same phase. It will be close to the same phase, a little bit further along in its cycle. While we're looking at the sky here, I'll quickly bring us out into the countryside just to see if that gives us a better opportunity to see Mars. Of course, the light in the sky all adds up. So the light pollution that we're seeing in the city in the middle of the night, the light of the sunrise coming up in the morning is additive with that. It's extra light in the sky, and it does, well, that's Mercury. I wonder if Mars will pop up if we take a close enough look. It will. Now, this is going to be almost imperceptible to the actual human eye. This would be very difficult to see. Mars will be in a much better position later on. But, you know, if you have a camera, especially if you have some way of looking at this without endangering your own eyes, if you have a camera obscura or a pinhole camera or something like that, where there's no lenses, there's no focusing of light in that way, then you might be able to catch the little dot of Mars. But otherwise, you know, it'll keep pushing out further from the sun in its orbit as we get into February and into March. And of course, we're going to be looking further ahead into the year of 2024. We do have some interesting things coming up. We've got various types of eclipses, solar and lunar, total, annular, partial, penumbral. There's a lot of interesting things coming up. So I hope that you'll join me for those future videos as we take a preview of 2024. That'll be coming soon. And then as we move through 24, I'll keep you updated on what you can actually see in the sky. So if you enjoyed this little brief look into the coming January and some stuff that we'll be able to see, please do like the video and subscribe if you'd like to see those future updates as they come, and hopefully I'll see you here next time.